totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome to Booked on Rock. It's the podcast for those about to read and rock. Make sure you subscribe and follow the podcast on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Exclusive video segments from each episode. Links to all the social media sites at bookedonrock.com, where you can also find the Booked on Rock blog. Actually, just put up a blog on the future of AI music. What to expect? What are the legal ramifications as this continues to grow and get more and more popular? Check it out at bookedonrock.com. You can also sign up for our email subscription list, so if there's a new episode, video, blog, you will get an email right away. Mudhoney, Steve Turner, and author Adem Tepedelen are here to talk about Turner's brand new book, Mud Ride, A Messy Trip Through the Grunge Explosion. This book chronicles the birth and evolution of the Seattle grunge scene, from amateur skate parks and underground hardcore clubs to a worldwide phenomenon, told by one of its founding fathers and the lead guitarist of legendary alternative rock band Mudhoney. Adem shares his experience working on the book with Steve and what the Seattle music scene was like in the early 90s. Steve has some great stories about his childhood friendship with Stone Gossard, his early days as member of the band Green River, the formation of Mudhoney, meeting Eddie Vedder, touring with Pearl Jam and Nirvana, why he declined the offer to join Nirvana in 1990, and how he created his classic Super Fuzz sound. A playlist of Green River, Mudhoney, and Steve Turner's solo work can be found in the show notes page, but first, let's hear from Steve Turner and Adem Tepedelen. This interview was recorded a little over a month ago, sometime around mid-May, and we wanted to hold off on it until the book came out, which it is, released on June 13th. Here we go. Here are Steve and Adem.
All right!
Hey, what's going on, guys?
Hey,
Not much.
There's an opening. How did you guys team up for this project? Where did you guys meet?
we met like all good relationships via social media. I propositioned him via Instagram, I think. And then I just said, hey, want to write a book? You ever thought about writing a book? And apparently he had. So I, we followed up via email, and this was all during the pandemic. So we conducted our business via Zoom for, the next year and a half or so. We kind of start meeting a little bit, and then got ourselves a book deal, and then got down to doing the work. But we didn't meet in person until, well into this whole thing.
Did we not meet in person 20-something years ago?
I have no recollection. I don't think we actually did. No.
Okay, because I obviously knew who you were from the Seattle music world. I guess as soon as we met.
Yeah, and we should mention you have a long history as a rock journalist, and actually you write about a bunch of different topics, right?
Yeah, I've kind of ping-ponged around a little bit professionally. Really, rock has been my main focus. The one thing I've really wanted to write about. I started writing fanzines in high school, but I was really mostly heavy metal focused at that point. But then, as Steve mentioned, like when I graduated from college from the University of Oregon, I moved to Seattle in 1990, and I started working for the local music magazine called The Rocket there. And so then I started. I kind of worked my way up until I got to be an editor there. Then I kind of got burned out in about 1997 and or 98 or something around there. And I just took other writing gigs. Let's just put it that way. And then I kind of came back around to writing about music in the early 2000s. But I was also, trying to do this as a freelancer, full-time freelancer, and you can't really make a lot of money just writing music magazines. So I started writing about wine and beer and travel and all kinds of stuff. And then, just I've kind of played to my strengths. And more recently, though, I wanted to focus on writing books, which is how I kind of got together with Steve on this, because I think that's the way forward for me as far as making some money.
Well, yeah, we got a great one here, no doubt. A great forward in the book from Pearl Jam guitarist Stone Gossard, a longtime friend of yours, Steve, since 1982 while living in Seattle. You were born in Texas, but moved to Seattle when you were 2. So
just a wee one, yeah, like 2 years old.
Yeah, and what's interesting about your backstory is that you were introduced to music, particularly punk rock, through Skateboarder magazine and the band Devo.
Yeah, well, I didn't really care about rock music as a kid. My dad had a few records I liked, the Clancy Brothers, Irish folk music, Lead Belly record. My mom had a Dory Previn record called On My Way to Where, which I still think is one of the greatest records ever recorded. But I didn't care about rock music, and it seemed stupid. I had friends that were into Kiss and stuff, and I was like, really? This is dumb. But as a skateboarder, we went from listening to like terrible music like Ted Nugent at the half pipe to suddenly Devo and Black Flag and stuff, because some of the pros got into punk rock. So where the pros went, like Steve Olson, Dwayne Peters, Jay Adams, Jay Smith, we all followed. And suddenly all the skateboarders were into punk rock. And it really captured my imagination, I guess. It didn't seem as stupid. And it was kids making some of the music. Well, the second show I saw the first show I saw was Devo, which was amazing. But the second show was Black Flag, and a local band called Soldier opened. And they were my age. And I just thought that was amazing. I was like, what? Like kids playing, arguably shitty music, but it was great shitty music.
In the fall of '82, you meet Stone Gossard. An interesting dynamic between you and Stone in terms of musical tastes when you meet him. You each had your own bands and music that you were into, and they differed, yet you say you found some common musical ground eventually, and that this would be a meaningful connection in many ways. Can you take us back to when you met Stone and how that musical connection would be meaningful?
Well, when I met him, I was a senior. I went to I basically flunked out of public school, and my parents paid for me to go to a kind of a hippy dippy private school called Northwest School for the Arts, Humanities, and Environment, which sounds fairly like what it is. It was a great school. But Stone was there, and he was a year younger than me, and he was a heavy metal asshole, basically, sarcastic and hilarious. And we became friends just over being sarcastic, I think, and his main buddy at the school, Jeff Covell, was in my class, and he was another heavy metal dude. And they were hilarious, and we became friends, and we started hanging out after school. And, Stone has really good musical taste as far as hard rock goes. He turned me on to Alice Cooper Band, the first few records, and Motorhead, two really great, significant things in my life. And I turned him on to, Southern California punk rock and hardcore, the more melodic stuff he liked, Social Distortion, Adolescence. He wasn't much for, Void and things like that. But we kind of like cross-pollinated, I guess. And then, we tried to have a band called the Ducky Boys at the end of my senior year, and that didn't work because the singer refused to sing in front of us. He was embarrassed.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
Panicked.
Yeah. So I was like, oh well. But, it didn't matter because Jeff Covell was going off to college anyway. So I immediately joined with Alex Shumway, who was a big part of the story too. He also was at Northwest School. I joined up with a band called Splooey Numa with him for a couple of months, and then joined Mr. Epp with Mark. And a year later, or less than a year later, 6 months later, that fizzled out, and we started Green River with Alex, Mark, Stone, and me, and Jeff.
And you refer to it as the first real band, right, in the book?
Pretty much, yeah. Mr. Epp was awful, but great awful. I loved them before I was a member of the band. Limp Richards was, not much better. As far as I loved Limp Richards, and I think Dave had some amazing lyrics and stuff, but it was the first proper band that we tried to do that actually played songs.
And it's interesting because your mindset was you didn't have any grand plans. It was just like, okay, let's do it.
Yeah, no. It took a few years until people actually started having plans for the future, and I still thought they were misguided and doomed to failure. But they, Jeff and Stone obviously proved me very wrong.
Yes, and they did okay. Adam, how familiar were you with Steve's backstory prior to writing the book?
Well, I got into Green River early on. I was going to the University of Oregon in 1985 to 1989 in Eugene, Oregon. And I was reading this magazine called Metal Forces. I read about Green River in an issue of that, which is kind of unlikely now, but at the time I didn't know any better. I just read about this cool Seattle band, and some of the names that they name checked in describing the music appealed to me. And so when Green River's first EP came out, of course I went out and got it right away. So, I've been pretty on top of, and Green River became one of my favorite bands back then. I got the Deep Six compilation that came out in '86. So I was just really invested and interested in the Seattle music scene that was burgeoning at the time. I was following it very closely, watching as Sub Pop came out with all these early releases. I was getting all the early singles and stuff. So yeah, and I became a huge Mudhoney fan. I followed basically when Green River split into Team Mudhoney and Team Mother Love Bone Pearl Jam, I became largely Team Mudhoney. I mean, I liked Mother Love Bone and Pearl Jam, but I felt more connected and more strongly about Mudhoney. So I definitely followed Steve's career and was a big Mudhoney fan, and I saw them early on and many times afterwards. So yeah, I mean, part of the reason why I propositioned Steve to do this is because I was a big fan. I mean, I thought that he would have a really interesting story, and I wanted to tell that story or help him tell that story. So yeah, I was a fan going way back, all the way back to the Green River days.
Steve, you say you came across 60s garage rock around that time, and you say one of the best purchases you ever made was an album from a compilation series called Pebbles. Can you talk about that, how that music influenced your look and your sound?
I give Scott McCoy from Young Fresh Fellows and REM a lot of credit for this, because he worked at Cellophane Square record store in the University District in Seattle, and there was a small little punk rock section, and he would sneak in all these 60s garage records into the punk rock section, the Sonics and the Wailers and Paul Revere and the Raiders, all the Northwest, classic stuff from the 60s, as well as compilations like the Pebbles stuff. And I think it was Pebbles number 9, volume 9, which I thought, like, it's volume 9. Like, what the heck, And I got it, and it was just simple 3-chord teenagers rocking out, sub Louie Louie songs, some with total fuzz and attitude, some more, little boy with their pants around the ankles kind of stuff. But but I loved it, and it totally. I already knew a little bit of that music. The Seeds, Pushing Too Hard was one of my favorite songs as a little kid. A few rock and roll things made it through the Clancy Brothers, but it totally made sense to me that that's the exact same stuff as the teenage hardcore bands that I was into in 1982 as well. It was the same deal, just a slightly different music. And by 1983, hardcore was starting to, in my mind, run its course. You can't go any faster at a certain point. You can't get any faster than Gangrene. And like, where do you go? And some other bands started popping up. The Replacements were big to me. Sorry Ma Forgot to Take Out the Trash, where there's elements of hardcore, but also elements of, rock and roll, I guess, that was missing from hardcore stuff. And Meat Puppets 2 came out, and I was a huge fan of the Meat Puppets already, but when Meat Puppets 2 came out, I'm like, okay, whole nother avenue to explore here, which was because they kept getting compared to Neil Young's album Zuma. So I went and bought Zuma. So, that got me going in other directions, more psychedelic stuff as well. But the garage punk, I still feel a real kinship with, It's funny, actually, next week, me, Stone, and Regan Hagar are going to record some garage rock.
Nice.
See how it goes. Like, we have nothing planned, but we're going in the studio.
No promises, just going to see
promises, but
very cool.
Yeah.
That's a little exclusive. What's
right?
Stone gonna play? Is he gonna play guitar or bass?
We don't know. We have he set up a few guidelines of what to do, kind of. Stone's an odd duck. I'm assuming we'll both play guitar and or bass. Regan will play drums. Mm-hmm. And we'll see what happens, but it's gonna be fun.
Very awesome. Cool. Very cool. And I think it was Jeff Ament that was the big Kiss fan. I think was in the first Green River show. He had the white face paint on. You guys made quite the first impression on that first Green River show.
That was a weird one because I was still singing 2 songs in the set, and Mark was playing guitar on a couple of songs. Mark's a genius, idiot savant on the guitar. So I always wanted him playing guitar. I didn't just want him as fret guy, but Green River evolved into that. And I'm a terrible rock and roll singer, so no worries there.
Was it at that first show you guys played like in a complete shithole, or was that a different
That
one?
was a second Green River show, was the Gray Door. That was a shithole.
The Gray Door, that's right.
Yeah. The first show was just at a kind of a loft space, a cool, weird, illegal, like people were living there that they weren't supposed to be living there kind of spot. I mean, it was the early 80s. It didn't matter.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was actually a pretty cool spot. A little backyard with a couple of trees in the backyard. It was kind of neat.
Adam, do you remember your first Green River show?
Oddly enough, I didn't see them until the reunion. Because as Steve can attest, Green River didn't tour much nor very successfully, unfortunately. No. They did happen to play in Eugene around the time of Dry as a Bone, but I unfortunately was out of town that weekend. I heard it was a great show, but I did not see it. So I saw them, at one of the reunion shows in Seattle in 2008 or something like that, when it was the 3-guitar lineup with Steve and Bruce and Stone.
What was that? The Sunset Show? Did you see?
No,
that
it was the Showbox. It was the Showbox.
Oh, okay. With the Melvins.
Yeah, the Melvins. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So, but it was really cool, I have to say, because in a way, I think that I got a better deal seeing them then, because I got to see, I hear some of the Steve Turner era songs as well, and seeing all three of those guys, the guitar players on stage, was really cool. So no complaints. I was thrilled by that. Honestly, it was one of the coolest reunions I think I've ever seen. So
that was really fun to do. I feel lucky that we got to do it, and we got everybody involved in it. It was fun revisiting it all together too. We realized some of the early demos that Alex wrote were actually probably the best songs that we ever had.
Steve, I remember I had an author on who was a rock journalist in Seattle back in those days, and he just talked about all the great venues to see shows. I mean, great, not like beautiful great. Some of them were, but some were just so beautifully shabby and run down that it was just the perfect place to see a show. What is it like now? How much has it changed since then?
Well, I don't live there, for one, and I wouldn't be going out much if I did live there anyway. But the Crocodile has moved, and it's still a great venue. Mudhoney played there last year. We're playing there again in a few months. I mean, time moves on.
Some of those venues are still going. They have different names. Like what was the off ramp is now El Corazon.
Right. Yeah, El Corazon. Yeah.
And then Moe's is New Moe's. So, some of them are still there, but like Rock Candy's gone. And that was, gone. I would say, a fairly iconic one. But that was even sort of later in the whole grunge era, so to speak. But like a lot of the clubs from like the early era, like the Metropolis era, those are obviously all gone. Guerrilla Gardens, all that stuff. But the Central, I don't know, the Central may be operating, but they're not the same. As Steve said, it's like they may have live music, but it's different now. I think that there are a few that are still kind of underground. I think like Numos, El Corazon, and Crocodile are kind of the remnants of it. They still have kind of like
the Central is still open, and it's kind of a tourist spot.
Right.
Posters of the old shows from the late 80s and stuff. And I went in there a few months back. My girlfriend wanted to go there because she's a big Seattle music fan. And so we went in there. It was interesting to all these old posters of shows I went to back in 87, 88 and stuff. And but I mean, that's a long time ago. And there's an aspect of Seattle that is a bit of a museum, a dusty museum for certain spots, and that's fine. People like that stuff.
Guerrilla Gardens is one of the venues. Your last show with the band was July 7th, 1985 at Guerrilla Gardens. And that was one you felt bad about. You say you were,
I was a dick.
Yeah. Can you talk about that night and why you felt you were the odd man out and you had to leave the band?
Because I didn't like the music that we were playing, ultimately, and, I should say they got much better after I left. Getting Bruce in the band and doing Dry as a Bone and the Together We'll Never 7-inch, that was their best stuff. I guess was fighting what they wanted to do. I was going one way and they were going collectively another way. So I was the odd man out there. And I realized that night, I was like, I got to get out of this. Like, I'm not I'm in their way, is what I realized that night. And it's we were young dudes, and it's that those kind of decisions are hard. And Alex and Mark were really bummed. Jeff was relieved. Me and Jeff were immediately friends again. Like he was so glad I was gone, and so was I. So we're like, yes, we are friends. We just don't want to be in a band together,
Well, you say Green River's ultimate breakup was a godsend for grunge. Everybody involved went on to form or join bands, including Mudhoney. And,
Everyone did great. And again, we were young dudes, and I said some shitty things about Mother Love Bone at the time, but not that shitty. I guess pointed out the obvious fact that there's a reason why Green River broke up, and you can see it in Mudhoney and Mother Love Bone. They're very different beasts.
So how does Mudhoney come together?
Well, me and Mark, actually, me and Dan, first, we jammed together in a basement party, and we talked about maybe doing something with Ed Fotheringham, who was the singer for the Thrown Ups, because he was talking about maybe wanting to be in a real band, and he's a great front man. So I was like, yeah, well, I'll do that. Let's go for it. The three of us practiced a couple times, and Ed just hated it. And so Ed quickly realized he did not want to be in a real band. That left me and Dan, and then Green River broke up around that same time. So of course Mark is going to come back in with me because everything we did together, it seemed like. So the three of us were rehearsing, and the Melvins broke up, leaving Lucan behind, and they moved down to San Francisco and stayed together, but they told Lucan that they were breaking up. And so Lucan didn't have a band, and he's awesome. So he was the first guy we thought of, let's get Lucan, January 1st, 1988, the four of us practiced for the first time, and it went well.
Mudhoney's such a great band name. Who came up with that?
It's a Russ Meyer's film title, and we hadn't seen the movie, but we'd seen some other Russ Meyer's movies, and they were great. The Immoral Mr. Tease is one of my favorites. And Beyond the Valley of the Ultra Vixens. There's some good ones. I mean, they're borderline porn, because, big-breasted ladies bouncing around a lot. Faster Pussycat, Kill Kill. So we a long tradition of people borrowing movies from this man, Faster Pussycat, which is a great movie. That's one of his best. But that was already taken, so we chose Mudhoney.
The Booked on Rock podcast will be back after this. Mudhoney's Steve Turner and author Adem Tepedelen are here to talk about Turner's brand new book, Mud Ride, a messy trip through the grunge explosion. I want to go back to Stone's Forward. He writes, quote, Steve's impact on Seattle music and a huge number of artists and musicians is impressive. By God, he found the frickin' holy grail of all distortion boxes, Super Fuzz. It's during that time when you're in the Thrown Ups and Mudhoney that you start to develop your own guitar sound. How did that distinct sound all come together for you?
Well, I got my first Super Fuzz before Green River even. I was working at a Japanese restaurant in Bellevue Square, a mall, and one of the guys I worked with, Jerry, he was barely older than me. I was 17 at this point, and he was maybe 2 years older than me, but he'd been through the ringer of the Vancouver punk scene. He was in a band called the Bludgeoned Pigs. There's sadly no recorded history of the Bludgeoned Pigs. I'm disappointed by that. But Jerry worked there. He was no longer into punk rock. He was totally into new romantic, modern pop music at that time. And I was complaining that I couldn't get a good guitar sound out of my amp and guitar because that's all I had. And he's like, well, what distortion box are you using? I was like, what's that? And he kind of smiled. And the next day he showed up and handed me a Super Fuzz pedal. He's like, try this. So that was really the root of the fuzz obsession. Because I plugged that in, I was like, holy crap. You can't get any fuzzier. I didn't even know I liked fuzz. It was just like the seas parting kind of moment. And so that was, I was still in the Ducky Boys at that point. But when Green River started, I had bought a couple more distortion pedals. I was on a roll, because you could buy used distortion pedals for $5 back in 1984. So I bought a few more, including a Big Muff. And so by the time Green River started, I had a Big Muff. And that was kind of the basis, if you will, of my sound. It's a little creamier than the Super Fuzz.
Who are the guitarists that influenced you?
Well, Greg Ginn of Black Flag is one of the geniuses of the guitar in my mind. And beyond that, it was just no-name people. Yeah, I didn't even know who they were. They were in garage bands from the 60s. Blue Cheer. I started to really like that. Leigh Stevens. I knew his name because his name was on the record covers. Neil Young, kind of early on. Kurt Kirkwood of Meat Puppets is, phenomenal guitar player. And I had no idea what the heck he was doing. Bubba from Void was a huge one because it was just noise chaos. So I didn't really have guitar heroes that I wanted to emulate so much as I just wanted to make noise.
Well, yeah, that's what you get across in the book. You were and still are the type of guy that's just not into what everybody else is into or guitarists that everybody else may be into. You followed your own path.
Yeah, I still search out obscure, weird music. That's always been my thing.
Well, Stone even says it. You got a huge collection of records. Do you still have that collection? Like, how big is this collection? Like a garage fill?
No, I used to have a storage unit full of records, but I've been selling records. That was part of my side hustle for the last 20 years has been selling records. So I've pared down my collection, but I keep buying things continually as well, some to sell and some to keep. I was very happy to go to Mississippi Records yesterday, and I bought 7 records for $10.
Adam, what are your thoughts on Steve's guitar sound and Mudhoney's sound? When did you first hear Mudhoney?
Well, as I said, I probably heard the very first thing that they did. I had heard about Mudhoney before I heard their music, so I was primed to. I was very excited to actually hear their records. I'm not sure what it was that I heard first, but I literally got all of their first recordings, whether it was the track on the Dope Guns and Effing in the Streets compilation.
24. That came out first, I think. I think that song 24 came out officially first.
Yeah.
Followed by the Hate the Police on the Mondo Stereo compilation.
Right. Which I got also. And then I got the Super Fuzz Big Muff EP. But those early tracks I really loved. And so from my perspective of, up till that point, largely being primarily kind of a heavy metal, heavy rock kind of fan, although, I had a varied taste, basically. I'd gotten into garage rock as well. Mudhoney hit all the sweet spots for me. They're not obviously a heavy metal band, but, that early on they were pretty heavy and pretty, I loved Steve's guitar sound, just the dirtiness, the nastiness of it. And I could definitely hear the garage rock's influence in there. It sounded thick and raw and distorted, but it didn't sound like Marshall Stack kind of distorted, Yeah. So, that's what definitely appealed to me. I really liked Mudhoney's rawness and, I always loved Mark's voice. So, to me, as a huge Green River fan, Mudhoney was an easy transition as far as I was concerned. I totally saw that they were not doing the Guitar Hero solos and stuff like that. Mudhoney was not, but I loved Steve's, chaos. There's one of my favorite solos that Steve's done is on this Sub Pop single. And I couldn't even tell you the A side, but I like the B side is one of the B sides is this song called Thorn. And then they later recorded it on Every Good Boy Deserves Fudge, I believe. But it just has this great 15-second solo that's just, I have memorized the sound of it. I know every note of it. I couldn't play it, obviously, but I just loved how concise and crazy and just perfect for the song it is. I like a lot of the same artists that Steve likes. I like Neil Young. I like, a lot of the same stuff. So I get what he's going for. I like the chaos. I like the, who knows what might happen with this solo kind of approach. I always appreciated that. So I see where he's coming from.
That song, obviously I was in the throes of my Billy Childish fandom at that point, but also, I know every note to solos in songs like Louie Louie, the Kingsmen.
Mhm.
It's a perfect solo. It's borrowed from the Wailers version of Louie Louie, but it's an absolutely perfect solo. And the solo in Pushing Too Hard by the Seeds, every note. I know that solo, I can hum it to you if you,
Mhm.
I know every note. And that's, I wanted chaos, but I also wanted a little bit of melody in some of those solos too.
Mhm. Mhm.
As far as songwriting, Steve, I know on the new Mudhoney album, there is some outside songwriting on that one. But in general, for you, what is the approach? Does a song come to you just out of nowhere? Does it start with a riff? Are you always ready to record something right on your phone whenever you have an idea? How does that all come about for you?
For me, I always thought that, if I'm just sitting on the couch playing something absentmindedly, even, 25 years ago or whatever, I'd be sitting on the couch with a guitar in my hand watching TV and just kind of strumming absentmindedly. And if something caught my ear that I was playing, then I would go, oh, okay, what's that? And then I'd play it again and stuff. And I wouldn't record it because I realized if I couldn't remember it the next day, it probably wasn't worth, I'm probably wrong on this, but my theory was like, well, if I can't remember the next day, then it wasn't that good anyway. It doesn't matter. But yeah,
Yeah.
I guess would, come up with things sitting on the couch. At this point, I do record things onto my computer, after I've played it for a few days. But it was fairly organic. And then the way we write songs is we have to be pretty much in the same room together to write something. But that said, on this new record, we didn't have the time to do that because we didn't see each other for a year and a half because of COVID. So we had to get some shit done in the studio. And our long-term recording engineer slash co-producer, Johnny Sangster, was a big help in making sense of the chaos that we have. We had, 30, 40 ideas for songs and trying to sort out what we were doing. That's why he gets credit on a few songs on the record, because he kind of helped focus us onto what we were doing with that particular song. And, he's an old valued friend. So of course we're going to credit him if he's helping us.
This new Mudhoney album, by the way, we should mention, is titled Plastic Eternity. Came out in April. Was this a planned project or did it just kind of happen?
No, we wanted to get a record done. We were just frustrated because of COVID. We couldn't do anything. We had to cancel tours over and over that were scheduled. And, but we didn't want to get together until we'd had a couple of shots in us. So once we got together, it was a, hurry up and get it done kind of situation. But, we still ended up with lots of extra songs, just picking and choosing. I leave that to Mark. Once we get everything done, I kind of leave it to Mark to sort out what should be on the actual record. Because, lyrics and those kind of things are kind of unify the record. So I bow out. I'm just like, put the record together, I'm all for it.
You do write in the book about being asked to join Nirvana. This would have been around, this is 1990. In fact, Mudhoney drummer Dan Peters was actually drumming for the band. That was summer of 90, I think. You were asked to join the band, but you declined. You say you felt they were better as a trio?
I mean, they weren't anything yet. Remember, this was like right when Dave Grohl joined. And, right after they kicked Dan out. So, and Dan was my roommate at the time too. So I was like, I can't join a band that just kicked out Dan, but I legitimately just thought they were a great three-piece. And so my advice was like, don't get a second guitar player. You guys are great as a three-piece, like that's a rare beast. A really good, powerful three-piece is a rare beast. And, I didn't even think of it at the time. It didn't matter or anything. And, years later, I thought about it like, well, what if I had said yes? I wouldn't have lasted more than a few weeks, I don't think, because there's just a lot of chaos involved with those people. Yeah. And as much as I love them, Chris is awesome. I've known Chris forever, but I wasn't the guy to be in that band. And that's pretty obvious, it wouldn't have worked out. And they got Pat Smear, and he was the dude. It was great, but they'd had a second guitar player earlier, which is terrible. It was just muddied up the sound. But Pat Smear was the dude. He was the right guy for the job. He's a great guitar player and could somehow maneuver his way through those very volatile personalities.
Well, you know firsthand what it was like working with Nirvana and Pearl Jam because you toured with both around 93, 94. And you say there was quite the contrast in atmosphere, some bad vibes within the Nirvana camp. Now, this is right towards the end of Nirvana, right?
Yeah, it was eye-opening to us, and it scared us because we'd already agreed to like doing the Pearl Jam tour. And we're like, God, if this is what Nirvana's like, how awful is the Pearl Jam tour going to be? And we couldn't have been more wrong. Pearl Jam was organized and happy with their situation. Everybody in Nirvana was they were head in the sand, sort of. They didn't want to admit that they got there because of the record they made, and they should have been really happy, but nobody was happy in that camp, and that was a bummer. And there was a lot of arguing and weirdness on that tour, and then we did the Pearl Jam tour, and it was great. And to me, we learned a lot, seeing like you can actually navigate this giant world of rock stardom and keep things, together and circle the wagons, I guess. There's still people that work for Pearl Jam that were on that first tour we did.
They still work with them today.
Yeah. They have great people around them, and they treat people with a lot of respect, and they're happy to be where they're at. They feel very lucky, and all that sort of stuff. They don't take it for granted. They work hard, Pearl Jam. Yeah.
What have you thought of the music of Pearl Jam over the years?
I think once they got Matt Cameron in the band, they were 100 times better.
Really?
He was the dude that cemented them to me. They had a lot of it wasn't my cup of tea necessarily, but I could find things that were great. When Not For You came out, I think that was one of the first songs that Ed wrote on guitar. It was very simple, like 3 chords. Okay, this is a good song. But yeah, no, they're great. I can't imagine being in that band and playing live for 3 hours every night on tour.
Yeah, it was a bummer with COVID. They had just put out that album, Gigaton, and that great single, Dance of the Clairvoyants, like a Talking Head song. And they were just set to go out on tour to support the album, and then everything, with COVID just turned to shit.
Yeah, that's a great record, too.
It is, yeah.
Really good. They mixed things up. It was a really cool record. Stone's playing bass on that song, and Jeff's playing keyboards and guitar. It's good stuff. I saw them do it live.
I don't know how much Matt writes in the band, but he's a very talented songwriter. I don't know how much he's contributed over the years, but that could be part of the reason why.
Yeah, no, he's an incredible songwriter. I had a label back in the 90s and put out Water Conspiracy records that he was very much involved in the songwriting on that stuff, which I thought was fantastic. But yeah, I saw them at Ohana a year and a half ago now, I think. And they played 2 nights in a row. And the first night they hadn't played live for a while, and they were trying to do a bunch of the new songs, and it didn't go well for them.
Really?
And they were bummed, and I could see it on stage. Like my girlfriend was watching, loving it because she's a huge Pearl Jam fan. And I was like, they're not having a good night. I could tell because I know them. So I was like, this is a hard one for them. I couldn't really tell musically, but I could just tell the way they were looking at each other and stuff. I was like, this is hard. And the next night was great. They'd sorted it out. This is how hard they work. The next day they had a 3 or 4 hour practice before the show.
Wow.
To sort out their problems. And then there was a fantastic show. You could tell they were really stoked on it.
And of course, Pearl Jam was part of that huge grunge phase, early 90s. Adam, what did you think of that whole period?
It was weird because I was obviously a fan of the music going, way back to its earliest roots, as I said before. What was weird to me was there was a certain point in the early 90s when, and I'm sure Steve can understand and attest to this, where Seattle became kind of silly in a lot of ways. And by that, I mean a tremendous number of people moved there. And I was one of them, to be honest. But people were moving there kind of for the wrong reasons. There were a lot of musicians that were moving there to find their fame or whatever. There were people moving there just because they wanted to be close to the scene that was producing all these bands that they loved. But when I got there in 1990, you could see, for instance, Pearl Jam's first show at a small, intimate nightclub. And, it was mostly like, it was a lot of you got to know everyone in the scene pretty easily. It was still pretty small at that point. It wasn't like the small scene of the early 80s that Steve kind of came up in, but it was still pretty small. Like,
Sure.
You'd go to a show and you'd see all the same people, but then maybe, as it's getting closer to 92 and 93, when all these bands got so big, that's when it kind of got ridiculous. And I think that you started seeing some reaction to that within the scene. The people that had been around for a while were not happy about it. Grunge became a dirty word. No one was really wanting to claim that title. And, I just remember going to one show that Mudhoney played. I think it was a benefit show at the Rock Candy, where they were playing and there was just like a nonstop procession of people stage diving, to the point where I think the band kind of just stopped, or maybe everyone but Dan stopped playing, and then people just kept stage diving. It was just kind of like
that probably was a flop in the gits, huh?
Yeah. Flop in the
Yeah.
gits, yes. And at that point, I just remember thinking, I gotta leave. This has just
Right.
kind of gotten stupid. Also, I should note that part of what made Seattle so exciting and great wasn't just the fact that it was intimate, but it's what the bands were doing at that time. And so, things change. Bands put out records, they get bigger, a lot changed. Bands' sound changes, all these things change. So the music that was coming out in 1993, whatever, it wasn't like the music that was coming out in 86, 87, 88. It had changed, and it was just a different musical scene in a lot of ways. And so it wasn't so much just the fact that it had kind of gotten overrun with silly business. It was just like the music was different. Everything about it was different. Seattle was changing. Seattle was becoming this different city that looked nothing like Seattle in the 80s.
And I should also point out that all of us that were from the early scene, we were all on tour all the time too. So
Exactly.
We weren't hanging out the same way that we did in the mid to late 80s anymore. We were doing our own thing and also getting older, and people were starting to get married and things like that, as you do as you get older. So that original scene just dissipated naturally, as well as some of the bands getting huge. Time just marches on.
Steve, one last quick Pearl Jam question for you, because you have in the book, there's a funny story about when you were introduced to Eddie Vedder. It was funny the way he introduced himself to you. He was very low key.
It was, a photographer from California came up to do a photo shoot with us, and Ed knew him, and Ed was already in Seattle doing I guess, Mookie Blaylock at that point, but we hadn't met him. And he was at our house, like kind of being the helper for the photographer. What do you call that?
Assistant, the photographer's assistant or whatever.
Yeah, an assistant. And, we were hanging out, and, we were drinking beer and, talking. He was a good guy, and, basically hung out with us for several hours before he finally said, like, so I'm the new singer and Stone and Jeff's thing. We're like, but we already liked him at this point. So it was he's a very perceptive dude, and he knew to kind of worm his way in first with us before saying that he was in the band with Jeff and Stone.
You say you saw Kurt Cobain around, but you didn't know him that well?
Yeah, he was a very shy person. We did a lot of shows together through the years. It was clear that we didn't have a whole lot in common. We would say, hey, how you doing, man? Great to see you. And then long pause, and there wasn't really much more to say. I knew Chris really well because he was the dude that was always with the Melvins in the early days. He was just their lumbering, goofy friend, in their van. I feel like I knew Chris really well.
Well, Kurt was a fan of Mudhoney, that's for sure. He did mention you guys.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I was a fan of Nirvana. They were great. Like right out of the gate, I thought they were amazing.
Yeah, and you do write about the day you heard the news that Kurt had died, April of 94. You yourself never had an issue with drugs or alcohol. What do you attribute that to?
Yeah,
that's always a big question. How much of it is chemical? How much of it is your environment? How much of it?
I had no interest in doing drugs.
Not at all, huh?
Yeah, I've smoked pot. I drink wine, on the daily, but I never ever wanted to do drugs. I mean, when I say I smoked pot, I've tried it handful of times. Like occasionally I do a little tiny bite of a gummy, a legally prescribed gummy here, but it's not, I don't really like it that much. It's, I've yet to find a marijuana thing that I go, okay, well, I like that. But I've never done, mushrooms or acid or any hard drugs whatsoever. Never tried cocaine. Cocaine seems like the stupidest drug of all time to me. As a teenager, I was a straight edge kid. And I hadn't even heard Minor Threat when I read about straight edge. I was reading about these teenage kids in DC. It's like, well, that makes sense to me. I'm that kid. I'm that guy. I'm a skateboarder. I don't do drugs, and drunk punk rockers wrecking the scene piss me off. So,
yeah,
I identified with straight edge as a 16-year-old for sure. But yeah, I just never was interested. Mark got way into drugs, obviously, and you also see that, and he's like, how's that working out? Not well. So I mean, I see people on the street with scabs all over their face, and I wonder how they can not put 2 and 2 together.
Yeah, I know.
I understand addiction's hard,
Did you know Mark Lanigan well of the Screaming Trees?
Yeah.
There's a guy I'm just now getting turned on to his music. The author Greg Prato wrote a great book on Mark. What an amazing musician. What an amazing artist.
Completely. Yeah, no, he was, I love the Screaming Trees from the moment I first heard their first record. I was like, wow. He was a troubled man, obviously. He threatened to beat me up once.
Really?
Yeah. But it was over something really important. He was arguing in Tim Harden's behalf, and I was arguing about Phil Oakes. We were the only 2 people in 1990 Seattle that liked folk music, and we didn't agree on our favorite folk singers at the time. He was a Tim Harden fan. I was a Phil Oakes fan.
That's good. Well,
I love Phil Oakes, but I do now see, I've come around to his side. Tim Harden is the better artist.
Well, it's a little too late now, isn't it, Steve?
It's a little too late, but I really did think he was going to kick my ass, because he was hammered at this party on Alki Beach at Bob Whitaker's house, and I really did think he was going to kick my ass. And he's a
big dude.
He was an intimidating man.
Yeah. Oh man, let's get to some of your solo work, Steve. You released 2 solo albums: 2003, Searching for Melody, and 2004, Steve Turner and His Bad Ideas. Oh, there's another one too, 2006's New Wave Punk Asshole. We can't forget about that one. As you would find out unexpectedly, Bruce Dickinson of Iron Maiden is a huge fan of Searching for Melody. Fans can read about that in the book, but what inspired these projects? There's some really great folk rock in here, singer-songwriter material on these. Dimebag Blues reminds me of early Grateful Dead bluegrass. I love it.
Yeah, I think of it as just folk rock. I love folk music, always have. Singer-songwriter stuff. I love James Taylor. I'm not supposed to as a punk rocker, but I do.
And tell the Bruce Dickinson story. This is great. You were on his radio show, right?
Yeah. Well, I was in London doing a few solo shows, and somehow I got an interview on the radio with Bruce Dickinson. And Bruce Dickinson has a bit of a history with the Seattle scene. He'd recorded 2 solo records with, I think 2, right? With Jack and Dino.
Just one.
Just one? Okay. I thought it was 2, but he recorded a record with Jack and Dino. And, I went to the radio station, and he came out and met me before the interview. And he did a spot-on, perfect Jack and Dino impersonation. Jack and Dino has quirks to him, and he nailed them. And he was like, Jack and Dino, Seattle, blah, blah, blah. He's like a little, fire plug, And he was saying how much he loved my record. He's like, yeah, it reminds me of James Taylor. It's great. Love it. Blah, blah, blah. I was like, that's like the worst thing you can say to because back in the mid 70s, that was the dividing line. James Taylor sucks,
Yes.
And Cream Magazine, all those people, they hated James Taylor, but I like James Taylor, And but it was just one of those funny things. I was like, Bruce Dickinson of Iron Maiden is telling me how much he loves my record because it reminds him of James Taylor. I'm like, okay, this is a moment for the books.
Bruce Dickinson, by the way, the guy's amazing. I mean, he looks the same. I mean, he's still as busy as he was in his 20s.
He does too much. He makes us all look terrible.
Yeah, he's flying airplanes.
Like underachievers.
Yeah, we are all underachievers next to Bruce Dickinson. I mean, he lives in a castle, first off.
Yeah.
He writes historical books about Celtic history. He's or he was. I don't think he's still. I don't think he's still a commercial airline pilot, but he was for a while. He had a BBC or whatever radio show. He sings for Iron Maiden. I'm like, dude, leave some of it for the rest of us. He was such a nice guy, and
That's cool.
That's what was really fun, where he was just clowning around and impersonating Jack and Dino.
So I want to go back to the new Mudhoney album, Plastic Eternity, the 11th studio album by the band. For those who haven't heard it yet, what can people expect to hear?
Well, it's just another Mudhoney record. One of the interesting things about it is that Dan, our drummer, is now bringing songs in. One of the first singles, I mean, I don't know how to consider things a single when they're just released digitally, but Little Dogs is all Dan's music that I had to learn how to play his guitar parts. And being a drummer, he has perfect timing and all that sort of stuff, and I do not have that. And so it was really fun for me to try to figure out and get into Dan's head and try to figure out these weird guitar licks that he had written. And he wrote a few other songs too, and it's just like, okay, this is a weird, interesting challenge to try to play guitar like a guy that doesn't play a lot of guitar. Well, Dan does play a lot of guitar now, but historically he's a drummer.
And along with the new Mudhoney album, of course, is this book, which is out now. What do you hope people will get out of this book?
Well, when we were first talking about it, I didn't want it. I've got no scores to settle with anybody. I didn't want it to be a mean-spirited book or anything like that. I just wanted to kind of celebrate the Seattle music scene that I came up in. And I think we did a pretty good job of that and showing my history through it and giving an awful lot of credit to an awful lot of other people. That's kind of what I wanted to do.
And Adam, for you, after working on the book with Steve, what did you get out of this experience?
Well, the one thing that I took away from it is the thing that we kind of started with Steve, because I wanted to know, first of all, what is your take on this? Like what, and the heart of it was how important hardcore was to the DNA, the formation of this sound that I think a lot of people maybe didn't give credit to or understand. But it wasn't so much that grunge sounded like hardcore, but it's just that these guys all met and came together and socialized and all that, and their bands played together when they were kind of all in hardcore bands playing, these all ages clubs in the early 80s. So to me, that was really interesting. And what I really came to appreciate about this is that, this is one musician's perspective from this era, which was a hugely influential and pivotal era. But, the thing that Steve has is that he was there in Seattle from age 2 on. I mean, he was, a lot of people, Kim Thiel from Soundgarden, hugely important to the scene as well. But he moved there in the 80s, the early 80s or something like that. And so everyone has their own perspective on what the Seattle sound is and the Seattle scene and stuff. But I was really fascinated by Steve's take on it and his perspective, regarding punk and hardcore and how important that was to the DNA. So I think that's something I really learned a lot about. And I think that we kind of carried that through. And, I think that'll be eye-opening to people, to kind of see what the roots were like and, how it all came together.
The book is called Mud Ride, A Messy Trip Through the Grunge Explosion. It is out now, came out on June 13th. And guys, where can people find you online?
I'm at ademtepedelen.com. So my name, ADEMTEPEDELEN.com.
I'm on the Instagrams and Facebooks.
Steve Turner, Adem Tepedelen. Thanks, guys.
Great.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
That's it. It's in the books.